Today I'm going to circle back to the beginning. I'm getting requests to back it up and start building a foundation for learning outside of school. So nearly 30 years ago, my dissertation focused upon a type of engagement called peak performance, or flow. Flow has always been referred to as the zone or optimal learning, along with many other names people make up to describe their experience when they're in flow. I have a friend that simply calls it clickin'. Flow is an optimal state of mind, body, emotion, and spirit, where we feel our best and perform our best. Many of us have experiences of flow, doing activities that we enjoy doing. You might engage all night on a project or chat for hours with a friend, feeling as if only minutes have passed. You might feel a deep connection to nature as you ski down a mountain, or lose your sense of time and space while lost in a good story. Perhaps the words to your writing flow beautifully together, or maybe you've played some type of musical instrument better than you thought was even possible. Those kinds of experiences don't have to be random, and they don't have to be only experienced by the very lucky. While I still believe my 30-year-old proposition that meaningfulness plus playfulness equals learning, I'd like to integrate that idea into our current understanding about how the brain learns, how creativity is expressed, and how we can more reliably experience this state called flow. I believe learning should be fun, exploratory, and child-centered. And I also understand that children get the most out of learning when experts partner with them and help them form vast knowledge frameworks in their minds. I collided with learning outside of school when my eldest child was in second grade. His private Waldorf teacher suddenly vacated her job, and he was left without a teacher. Additionally, the campus was moving locations, and there was a gap in there where the students had no physical school. Amidst the turmoil, I pulled him out, and I decided that I would school him at home. I recruited my mother to help with reading a couple of days a week, and I piecemealed the rest of it together using an online curriculum through a charter school that I would later end up teaching for. There were successes and failures during that year at home, and I learned a great deal, not only about my child, but about general needs that kids have for creativity, personal ownership, interaction with friends, and time outside in nature. I also saw my son kindle the first flashes of entrepreneurship as he used his knitting and crocheting skills to start a hat making business, selling his creations to locals for a hefty profit. My son ended up going back to a public charter school after the year at home, but for me, my focus on homeschooling continued. And this would be the first step in my journey to understand the needs and opportunities of learning outside of school. Fast forward a few years, and my middle son, a special needs fifth grader, was struggling in his third school. In search of an option that would provide needed supports and a compassionate community, I put him into yet another school, a public charter that offered a hybrid program. He would attend school twice a week, attend a half day of vendor-based activities once a week, and learn at home for the remaining days. At the time, I considered this 3-year middle school experiment a failure, but we stuck it out because it was the only way to ensure him a spot in the school's full-time project-based high school, which I was convinced would be a great fit for him, and probably likely the only positive option within striking distance. This highly competent boy with Asperger's refused to do much of anything during those middle school at-home days, except a series of short 2 to 3 minute computer videos that he enjoyed within an online program. He participated well during the at-school days and his elective day, but the heads down time at home was hugely a disappointment in my traditionally focused mind. Yet we stayed with it, and he transitioned into that high school and later into the school's charter college program, both of which were by and large successful experiences for him. My daughter, 9 years younger than my eldest, enjoyed her Waldorf charter school experience, even though she struggled with attentional challenges along the way. As I learned more and more about learning outside of school, I encouraged her to think about leaving the brick and mortar school where she'd been since kindergarten, and I'd even taken her out of middle school for a week to experience an alternative self-directed learning program. She enjoyed herself, but she ultimately self-directed herself right back into choosing to continue schooling with her friends. During COVID, my daughter schooled at home for a year, along with many of the world's children. For the most part, it was a dismal and depressing experience for her. In contrast, I noticed that the homeschoolers that I worked with, by and large, had little disruption and limited upheaval when compared to children attempting Zoom school. For those familiar with learning outside of school, things pretty much continued as normal. For much of my children's schooling, I had 3 kids and 3 different school districts as I attempted to individualize their learning and find the best, perfect fit. We used a mix of traditional public schooling, alternative schooling, and homeschooling during their years in school. I found that navigating within the different school systems and negotiating with teachers and service providers was often challenging, especially when working with a larger school district. Add a special needs child into the mix, and it was even more complicated and frustrating. If I had known what I know now, I would have done many things differently. School works for some children, but many are still sitting in classrooms or at home in front of a computer screen, bored, frustrated, disconnected, or simply not enjoying finding value in their learning. The cries to get out of that experience of learning deeply bother me, crush me in fact, because I know it doesn't have to be this way. School is considered dull, but necessary by some, soul-sucking by others. Negative school experiences are not natural, inevitable, or out of our control. We're blind to this problem simply because we've normalized it. We understand much more about how the brain learns and how skills are effectively developed than we did when the idea of schooling began. In some ways, it's much easier to meet individual needs when learning outside of school because there are so many more options and opportunities, as well as the support of a community of families making similar decisions. There are vendors, skilled educators, and communities of like-minded individuals wanting to be helpful. There's also science to help us understand how we learn, and an abundance of resources to support a myriad of educational choices. What I haven't seen, though, is a guide to help parents understand how motivation and learning work, such that they can feel comfortable in individualizing education outside of school. We're at a very beginning stage of democratizing and decentralizing education, and we need a pathway through that, one that's user-friendly. You don't need to be a trained teacher to provide your child with a high-quality education, one that exceeds traditional options. But you do need to understand enough about learning to help your child find their own optimal experience. When you tune in here, I'll offer you a framework to educate your children to be competent in an ability to focus deeply, acquire skills successfully, perform optimally, and motivate themselves towards whatever goals they choose in their lives. Throughout our time together, I'm going to share with you the real voices and the challenges experienced by my own 3 kids, by the hundreds of students that I've worked with, as well as the parents and teachers that I've also coached along the way. I imagine a future in which children wake up inspired and feel fulfilled in a day spent learning, following curiosities, developing passions, and bringing about positive change in the world through meaningful purpose. For today, I'd like to leave you with a question about questions. Are you asking the right questions when you think about your child's learning? Are you focused on the what's? And what I mean by that is the focus on the curriculum, the vendor classes, the lessons, or are you focused on the how, the why, and the when? How might your child learn to learn? And that includes understanding how to motivate herself, how to engage in learning, how to understand how her brain learns so she can optimally use her brain, and what to do when she gets stuck. There will always be gaps in our learning. We simply can't learn everything there is to learn in this big, beautiful world. My thinking is that if our kids know how to learn, they can fill those gaps whenever they choose. And if they truly have that skill to learn whatever they want, whenever they want, they become unstoppable. If you could learn anything and be successful at it, what would you learn?